Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves not in a cozy bedroom, but crouched on a damp rooftop in 12th century Persia. The wind whips at your face, carrying the scent of dust and wood smoke from the city below. You can feel the rough hemp of your tunic scratching against your skin, hear the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and taste the lingering bitterness of the cheap dates you had for supper. Below, the target's guards mill about, their eyes scanning the shadows. One wrong move, one misplaced foot, and you're not just looking at a failed mission, but a very public, and probably excruciatingly slow, execution. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and the local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's be real. Hollywood has painted a picture of assassins as these sleek, cool, almost supernatural figures. Think Ezio Auditore, John Wick, even Elektra. Silent, deadly, and impeccably dressed. Tonight, we're stripping away the cinematic gloss and getting down to the gritty, smelly reality of what it really meant to be an assassin, particularly during the medieval period, focusing on the legendary, but often misunderstood, Nizari Ismailis, also known as the Assassins. Forget the tailored robes. Imagine instead rough-spun wool dyed with questionable plant extracts, maybe a little too much beetroot, judging by the shade. It's itchy, it's probably got fleas, and it definitely hasn't been washed in weeks. You're not gliding through the shadows, you're trudging through mud-caked alleyways, trying to blend in with the throng of peasants and merchants, all of whom smell equally ripe. Forget parkour, you're more likely tripping over stray dogs and dodging overflowing chamber pots. One thing's for sure, you will smell like you're part of that alley. Your weapon of choice. Not some custom-forged, perfectly balanced blade. More likely a readily available dagger, sharpened perhaps, but certainly not glamorous. You've probably got a second one tucked into your boot, and maybe a length of rope concealed beneath your clothes. Forget poison vials and smoke bombs, you're lucky if you've got a handful of walnuts to stave off the hunger pangs. After all, you're not James Bond. You're more like a very, very determined, and exceptionally stressed, medieval postal worker with a homicidal delivery. The Nizari Ismailis were a branch of Shia Islam that emerged in the late 11th century. They controlled mountain fortresses across Persia and Syria, and, to put it mildly, they weren't fans of the Sunni Seljuk Empire that dominated the region. You've likely heard tales of their legendary leader, Hasan I Sabah, the old man of the mountain, who, according to Marco Polo, drugged his followers with hashish and offered them earthly paradise to motivate their deadly missions. Now, that's where the name, assassin, comes from the Arabic word hashishin, meaning hashish users. But the truth, as it often does, is a lot more nuanced. While some scholars believe they may have used drugs for ritualistic or strategic purposes, the idea of being constantly stoned and brainwashed is likely a gross exaggeration, perhaps even a smear campaign perpetuated by their enemies. Historians still argue whether the hashish stories are propaganda or reflect a genuine practice. Regardless, let's consider the actual missions. You're not sneaking into a heavily guarded palace to assassinate a king in his sleep. Much more likely, you're targeting a local governor, a tax collector, or a religious leader who's causing trouble for the community. And you're not doing it alone. Assassin teams typically consisted of 2 or 3 members, each with a specific role. One might be the actual attacker, another a lookout, and the third a getaway driver. Well, less driver, more guy who's really good at pushing through crowds. And there's no guarantee of success. In fact, the success rate was probably pretty low. You might be caught, tortured, and executed in the most gruesome way imaginable. We're talking impalement, beheading, or being thrown from the city walls. Think about that for a second, all those hours of training, all that planning, all that anticipation, only to end up as crow food. Not exactly a glamorous existence, is it? Talk about a bad performance review. Another common misconception is that these assassinations were always clandestine. Sometimes, the point wasn't just to kill the target, but to make a statement. Imagine strolling into a mosque during Friday prayers, walking right up to the most influential leader, and stabbing them in broad daylight. Talk about sending a message. This brazenness, this willingness to die for their cause, is what truly terrified their enemies. It's less about stealth and more about performance art with deadly consequences. Now, about the training. Forget martial arts and complex combat techniques. You're not learning how to disarm 5 guys with a chopstick. More likely, you're learning how to blend in, how to observe, how to be invisible in plain sight. You're learning the local language, customs, and even the target's daily routine. You're becoming a living, breathing spy, and that requires a lot more than just physical prowess. You would spend weeks, maybe even months, living in the target's vicinity, observing their every move, learning their habits, and identifying their weaknesses. You'd become a part of the background, a face in the crowd, a silent observer. Think of it as the ultimate stakeout, except instead of a coffee and donuts, you've got a dagger and a death wish. And don't think this was a solo operation, completely free of social interaction. The Nizari community was remarkably organized. Their fortresses weren't just military bases, they were centers of learning, culture, and religious devotion. They had libraries, schools, and workshops, and were renowned for their scholarship and craftsmanship. You're not just a killer, you're part of a society, a network of individuals bound together by a shared belief and a common goal. That's the official line, anyway. Unofficially, you're probably all just suffering from serious groupthink. Furthermore, let's not assume these assassins were simply mindless fanatics, blindly following orders. They were highly trained, intelligent individuals who believed they were fighting for a just cause. They saw themselves as defenders of their faith, protectors of the oppressed, and instruments of divine justice. They were not just killing, they were enacting a form of religious warfare. Or, at least, that's how they justified it to themselves. The legacy of the Nizari Ismailis is complex and multifaceted. They were feared and reviled by their enemies, but also admired and respected by their followers. They left behind a rich cultural and intellectual heritage, and their story continues to fascinate and inspire us today. From the fortress of Alamut, their stronghold in the Alborz Mountains, they launched a campaign of terror that shook the foundations of empires and left a lasting mark on the history of the Middle East. So, the next time you see an assassin portrayed in a movie or a video game, remember the reality behind the myth. Remember the mud, the fleas, the constant fear, and the ever-present possibility of a gruesome death. Remember that being an assassin wasn't about glory or honor, but about sacrifice, dedication, and an unwavering belief in a cause. And maybe, just maybe, you'll appreciate their story a little bit more. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's talk about something fragrant. Or rather, the distinct lack thereof, historically speaking. We're diving headfirst, or maybe nose first, into the surprisingly murky world of medieval hygiene. You might want to crack a window. Just in case. Imagine, if you will, that you're waking up in a medieval village. The rooster's crowing, the baker's already firing up the oven, and, what's that lingering aroma? Is that manure? Probably. And something else. Something earthy. And underneath it all, a faint, persistent note of, well, let's just call it unwashed humanity. You throw back the rough linen sheets of your bed, which, let's be honest, haven't been washed in probably, well, a while. We're talking potentially months. You're already scratching that itch on your ankle, could be fleas, could be just dry skin, it's a gamble every morning, really. You pull on your tunic, same one you wore yesterday, and the day before, and, you get the picture. Now, before you reach for the deodorant, remember, it doesn't exist. And even if it did, would you even want it? After all, personal scent was a pretty big deal back then. Historians still argue whether strong body odor was actually considered a sign of health and virility, or whether people just tolerated it because, well, what choice did they have? You head downstairs, careful not to slip on the mud that's inevitably tracked in. The floor is probably strewn with rushes, meant to absorb, well, everything. Crumbs, dirt, spilled ale, the occasional rodent dropping. Fun fact, those rushes were changed, supposedly, but usually only once or twice a year. Imagine the ecosystem thriving beneath your feet. Now, let's talk about washing. Or the distinct lack thereof. Bathing, for most people, was a rare event. We're talking maybe once or twice a year, if you were lucky. Think of it as a major social occasion, like the medieval equivalent of going to a spa. Except, instead of scented oils and fluffy towels, you had a communal tub, lukewarm water, and a whole lot of questionable company. The water, of course, would be shared. The lord of the manor would go first, followed by his family, then the knights, and then, well, whoever was left got the dregs. By the time the peasants got to bathe, the water was, shall we say, less than pristine. Some people believed that bathing too often was actually bad for you, that it stripped away your natural defenses and made you vulnerable to disease. Because smelling ripe was the key to good health. It's ironic, because the prevailing medical theory at the time was based on balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too much of one humor, and you'd get sick. Perhaps the humors were just overwhelmed by the sheer concentration of BO. But hey, at least they had soap, right? Well, sort of. Soap existed, but it wasn't the gentle, moisturizing kind we're used to. Medieval soap was typically made from animal fat and wood ash. Lye soap. Harsh, caustic, and probably smelled vaguely of burnt campfire. You really wouldn't want to get it in your eyes. Or anywhere sensitive, really. And even if you did have soap, using it regularly was still considered excessive. Now, if you were wealthy, things were a little different. You might have your own private bath, heated by a furnace. You might even have scented oils and herbs to add to the water. Royalty sometimes perfumed their bath water with rose petals and spices, trying to mask the underlying funk. Queen Elizabeth I, for example, was known to bathe, relatively frequently. Once a month. Though, historians still argue about what that meant, since her bath wasn't necessarily a plunge into water. It might have been more of a fragrant sponge bath. Still, miles ahead of the average peasant. Let's move on to dental hygiene. Or the horrifying lack thereof. Forget brushing twice a day, most people never brushed at all. Toothbrushes existed, in a rudimentary form, usually a frayed twig, but they were a luxury few could afford. So, what did people do? Well, they rinsed their mouths with water, maybe chewed on herbs to freshen their breath, and hoped for the best. The results, predictably, were disastrous. Tooth decay was rampant. Gum disease was commonplace. And bad breath? Well, let's just say you wouldn't want to get too close. Medieval teeth were often blackened, rotted, and falling out. And if you had a toothache? Your options were limited. You could try a herbal remedy, pray to a saint, or visit the local barber surgeon. The barber surgeon, as the name suggests, was a jack of all trades. He cut hair, shaved beards, and pulled teeth. No anesthesia, of course. Just a pair of pliers and a strong grip. Imagine the screams. One slightly fringe idea suggests that the red and white stripes on barber poles actually represented blood and bandages, symbolizing the barber surgeon's dual role. It's a gruesome thought, but hey, at least they were upfront about it. Moving down, a question arises. What about underwear? Well, most people didn't wear it. Linen shirts and tunics served as the primary layer of clothing. They absorbed sweat, dirt, and other bodily fluids. And, as we've already established, they weren't washed very often. It's kind of amazing anyone survived. If you were wealthy, you might have worn linen drawers or braids, loose-fitting underpants. But again, these were a luxury. And even if you did wear them, washing them was still a chore. So, they were probably just as ripe as everything else. And, while we're on the subject, let's talk about personal sanitation. Toilets, as we know them, didn't exist. Most people used chamber pots, which were then emptied into the street or a nearby river. Or, if you lived in a castle, you might have a garderobe, a toilet that jutted out from the castle wall. Which meant that waste just fell down. Hopefully, it landed somewhere far enough away from the castle that nobody noticed, or smelled it too intensely. Historians still argue on the environmental impact of all that waste pouring into rivers, or festering in the streets. I am sure it wasn't positive. Public latrines were also available in some towns, but they were notoriously filthy and smelly. Imagine a row of wooden seats over a pit filled with, well, you get the picture. Not exactly a pleasant experience. And, unsurprisingly, they were breeding grounds for disease. Okay, enough about that. Let's talk about food. Surely medieval cuisine offered some respite from all this filth? Well, not really. Food hygiene was also a major issue. Meat was often poorly preserved, vegetables were rarely washed, and water was frequently contaminated. Food poisoning was common. And the spices, oh, the spices. Often used not for flavor, but to mask the taste of rotten meat. One of the quirkier culinary practices was the use of trenchers, large slabs of bread that served as plates. You would pile your food onto the trencher, eat what you could, and then, either eat the trencher itself or give it to the dogs. Or, if you were really fancy, you might give it to the poor. A truly zero-waste dining experience. So, there you have it. A glimpse into the stinky reality of medieval hygiene. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't pleasant. But it was life. And somehow, people survived. They adapted. They developed their own ways of coping with the fragrant challenges of their time. And, in a way, it makes you appreciate modern hygiene even more. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go take a long, hot shower. Maybe two. With extra soap. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's talk about clothes. Medieval clothes. And I'm not talking about the kind you'd find at a Renaissance fair, all shiny and relatively clean. No, we're diving deep into the reality of what it was really like to get dressed in the Middle Ages. So, take a deep breath, maybe through your mouth, just in case, because things are about to get aromatic. Imagine waking up on a straw-filled mattress, already a treat if you're not sleeping on the floor, and reaching for your clothes. They're not exactly waiting for you, freshly laundered and folded. More like, crumpled in a heap on the floor, likely sharing space with whatever crumbs or dust bunnies have accumulated overnight. You pull on your linen undertunic. Now, this is your base layer. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of your least favorite t-shirt. Except instead of soft cotton, it's linen, which, let's be honest, can range from okay, breathable, to feeling vaguely like burlap sackcloth. You might be thinking, linen's natural. It's got to be good for you. And technically, yeah, it breathes better than some of the alternatives. But here's the thing, washing wasn't exactly a weekly occurrence. More like, a few times a year, if you were lucky. And even then, it involved a lot of beating against rocks with some questionable concoction of lye and whatever smelled the least offensive. So, your linen undertunic, while intended to protect your outer garments from your bodily fluids, was likely harboring a symphony of scents of its own. Think, faint hints of sweat, wood smoke, and that lingering aroma of whatever you spilled at the last feast. Fun, right? Historians still argue whether bathing was a truly rare event in the Middle Ages. Regardless of the frequency, your undertunic was a vital part of keeping you warm and protected. Over that goes well, whatever your station in life dictates. If you're a peasant, it's probably another layer of linen or maybe wool, depending on the climate and your budget. Wool, while warmer, also has a certain scratchiness to it. Think of wearing a slightly damp sheep. All day. Every day. And yes, it probably did smell a bit like a sheep too. You tug on your hose, which are essentially wool socks that extend all the way up your legs, and are tied, rather precariously, to your undertunic with laces called points. If those points come undone, prepare for a saggy sock situation of epic proportions. It's also worth noting that these aren't form-fitting tights. They're tubes of wool. Imagine the chafing potential. Ouch. If you're a knight, or someone of higher status, you might be sporting some slightly more elaborate threads. Think, a tunic made of finer wool or even silk, depending on your wallet and geographical location. You might even have some embroidery. But even the fanciest fabrics weren't exactly comfortable. Silk could be stifling, and the dyes used to color clothes often contained interesting ingredients. Some red dyes, for example, were made from insects. So, you were essentially wearing a crushed bug garment. Fabulous. And speaking of dyes, this brings me to a quirky little fact: purple was the color of royalty, not just because it looked good, but because it was incredibly expensive to produce. The dye came from a specific type of sea snail, and it took thousands of them to create just a small amount of pigment. So, wearing purple was basically like walking around with a sign that said, "I have more money than sense, and I'm not afraid to show it." This is why many European noble families have purple in their coats of arms. Now, let's talk about the outer layers. If you're going outside, you're probably going to need a cloak or a mantle. These were often made of heavy wool and could be incredibly cumbersome, especially if they got wet. Imagine trying to navigate a muddy medieval street while dragging around a waterlogged wool blanket. It's not exactly conducive to graceful movement. Plus, let's not forget about the weight. All these layers, all that wool, it adds up. You're basically wearing a small animal's worth of fleece, and that can get tiring after a while. And this is before you start adding armor. Footwear wasn't exactly a walk in the park either. Most people wore simple leather shoes or boots, which offered minimal support and were prone to leaking. If you were lucky, you might have some wooden clogs to protect your feet from the mud, but those could be slippery and uncomfortable. Imagine trying to chase a runaway pig through a medieval village wearing wooden clogs. Good luck with that. And then there's the issue of fit. Clothes weren't exactly tailored to perfection back then. Most garments were fairly loose and shapeless, relying on belts and laces to create some semblance of definition. This wasn't just a fashion choice, it was practical. Loose clothing allowed for a greater range of motion, which was important for physical labor. It also meant that clothes could be passed down or altered to fit different people. Talk about sustainable fashion. Of course, the practicality had its downsides. All that loose fabric could get caught on things, like farm equipment or errant swords. And let's not even talk about trying to use the restroom in all those layers. That was an adventure in itself. Headwear was also essential. Men often wore coifs, which were basically linen caps that covered the hair. Women wore veils or wimples, which covered their hair and necks. These weren't just fashion statements, they were also practical. They helped to keep the hair clean and out of the way, and they provided some protection from the sun and elements. Plus, the church was always keen on women keeping their hair covered. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the smell. I've already touched upon this, but it bears repeating. Medieval clothing wasn't exactly known for its cleanliness. With infrequent washing and limited access to effective cleaning agents, clothes tended to accumulate a certain aroma. Think of it as a personal scent cloud, composed of sweat, dirt, smoke, food, and whatever else you happen to come into contact with. And, let's be honest, perfumes were not exactly widespread. So, you were basically stuck with your own unique blend of eau de medieval. One could only hope that everyone else smelled equally as fragrant. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Did you know that some people used herbs and spices to try to mask the smell of their clothes? They would tuck sachets of lavender, rosemary, or cloves into their garments, hoping to create a more pleasant scent. It probably didn't completely eliminate the odor, but it might have made things a little more bearable. I like to imagine two medieval nobles arguing and both just smelling like a spice rack exploded. And finally, let's not forget about the restrictive nature of some medieval clothing. While loose clothing was common, certain garments, like corsets and fitted gowns, could be incredibly constricting. These were often worn by women of higher status, and they could make it difficult to breathe, move, or even eat comfortably. Imagine trying to enjoy a medieval banquet while struggling to breathe in a tight-laced corset. It sounds less than enjoyable. You might have thought the corset was a Victorian invention, but medieval women were known to tightly lace their dresses for a similar effect. One last thing to consider: the environmental impact. While medieval clothing wasn't exactly fast fashion, it still had an impact on the environment. The production of wool and linen required land and resources, and the dyeing process could be harmful to the environment. Historians still argue whether the impact was comparable to that of modern fast fashion. But it's a good reminder that even in the Middle Ages, our choices had consequences. So, next time you're complaining about your uncomfortable jeans or itchy sweater, remember the medieval peasant in his scratchy wool tunic and leaky leather shoes. It could be worse. You could be wearing crushed bugs, scented like a spice rack, and tied up like a sausage, all while trying to navigate a muddy street and avoid getting your clothes snagged on a passing ox cart. And, hey, at least you can take a shower. Now that I've made you think about all the smells in your life, maybe it's time for me to shower and you to, well, maybe not sleep yet. There's always more to learn. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about food. Specifically, let's talk about what it was like to actually eat in the Middle Ages. I know, history class probably skipped right over the culinary arts and went straight for the Black Death, but trust me, this is juicy. And by juicy, I mean sometimes literally, depending on what kind of questionable stew you're about to consume. Imagine you wake up one chilly medieval morning. The sun, if it dares to peek through the perpetually gray skies, does little to warm your drafty, probably straw-filled room. Now, you're hungry, right? Stomach rumbling, ready for a hearty breakfast? Well, hold your horses, because hearty is not exactly the word that springs to mind when describing the typical medieval fare. For the average peasant, which, let's face it, is probably you in this scenario, breakfast, lunch, and dinner are often a variation on the same theme: grain. Think bread, porridge, maybe some gruel if you're feeling fancy. It's usually made from barley or rye. Wheat was seen as kind of upper crust. This bread, now, it's not exactly the fluffy, artisanal sourdough you're used to. It's dense, coarse, and often, well, let's just say it could double as a building material. Historians still argue whether the widespread consumption of ergot-contaminated rye, which can cause hallucinations and seizures, played a role in some of the more interesting episodes of medieval history. Imagine trying to plow a field after a breakfast of that stuff. It's like nature's own little psychedelic experience. You trudge out to the fields, the sun slowly climbing higher. Your stomach still grumbling a bit, dreaming of something other than grainy, gray sadness. Maybe you'll get lucky and find some wild berries, or if you're really fortunate, maybe a root vegetable or two. Now, before you get too excited about the prospect of a nice roasted turnip, let me remind you that vegetables were not exactly prized for their flavor or, cleanliness. Everything was boiled. It always came down to a pot. And don't even think about spices. Unless you happen to live near a trade route or have a really generous lord, your food is going to be about as flavorful as that gray sky I mentioned earlier. Salt might be available, but pepper? Cloves? Saffron? Forget about it. Those were luxuries reserved for the wealthy elite. Oh, and speaking of the elite, their meals were, shall we say, a tad different. While you're gnawing on your day-old bread, they might be feasting on roasted swan, peacock, or even a whole boar. That's right, they were eating the food that would Instagram better than yours. You toil away in the field, the hours stretching on. Lunchtime arrives, and you trudge back to your humble abode for, you guessed it, more bread. Maybe you'll have some cheese if you own a cow or goat. The medieval dairy situation depended, geographically, on what animals were readily available. Now, this cheese wasn't exactly cheddar or brie. It was more like a hard, pungent, possibly moldy block of something vaguely dairy adjacent. But hey, protein is protein, right? You eat the bread. You eat the cheese. You try not to think about the fact that you'll be eating the same thing again for dinner. What's really interesting is how regional the diet was, too. What you ate depended a lot on where you lived. Coastal communities obviously had more access to fish and seafood, while inland areas relied more heavily on what they could grow or raise. Think about the Vikings. They were eating pickled herring, dried fish, and whatever they could raid from unsuspecting coastal villages. Not exactly a balanced diet, but it fueled those longboat adventures. One of the things that has come down to us is that Viking bread was so dense that they used it as plates. The only problem came when they ate the plate as well and ran out of them. As the sun begins to set, you finally finish your work for the day. You stumble back home, exhausted and, you guessed it, hungry. Dinner is, predictably, more bread, maybe with some beans or lentils if you manage to grow some in your garden. Now, you might be thinking, okay, beans and lentils, that sounds healthy enough. And you'd be right if they were properly cooked. But let's be honest, properly cooked wasn't exactly a medieval strong suit. Foodborne illness was a constant threat. Everything had to be boiled, boiled, boiled. So, you're risking a dodgy stomach, and there's nothing to be done about it. But let's talk about the meat situation. Now, most peasants didn't eat meat very often. It was expensive and difficult to come by. When they did get their hands on some meat, it was usually pork, which was relatively easy to raise. But again, hygiene was not exactly a medieval priority. Meat was often poorly preserved, attracting flies and other, unwanted guests. This is part of the reason they used spices. They couldn't cover the flavor of the meat with exotic ingredients as the rich could, but they could use strong flavors to mask the smell. Think about it. No refrigeration. Limited knowledge of food safety. It's a recipe for disaster. And yet, somehow, people survived. Actually, more than survived, they built cathedrals, fought wars, and created some of the most beautiful art the world has ever seen. All on a diet of bread, gruel, and the occasional questionable chunk of pork. Amazing, really. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds absolutely dreadful. How did anyone enjoy eating back then? Well, to be fair, they probably didn't, not in the way we do now. Eating was more about survival than pleasure. It was about fueling your body so you could work hard and, hopefully, live to see another day. But here's where things get a little more interesting. Because not everyone in the Middle Ages was a peasant. There were also nobles, knights, and clergy. And their diets were, shall we say, a bit more elaborate. Imagine you're a lord or lady, sitting down to a lavish banquet. The table is laden with roasted meats, spiced wines, and elaborately decorated pastries. Servants scurry about, offering you platters of delicacies you've never even heard of. Sound good? Well, there's a catch. Medieval banquets were as much about display as they were about sustenance. The goal wasn't just to eat well, but to show off your wealth and power. That meant serving dishes that were rare, expensive, and visually impressive. Remember that roasted swan I mentioned earlier? Yeah, that wasn't just for eating. It was a symbol of status. Ditto for peacock, pheasant, and any other exotic bird you could get your hands on. These fancy birds were often served with their feathers still attached, just to really drive home the point that you were rich enough to eat something that looked like it belonged in a museum. And don't even get me started on the spices. The wealthy were obsessed with spices. They used them in everything, not just to flavor their food but also to show off their access to exotic goods from distant lands. A dish that was heavily spiced was a status symbol. It meant you could afford to import rare and expensive ingredients. This, of course, led to some interesting flavor combinations. Imagine a roasted peacock stuffed with cloves, ginger, and cinnamon, served with a side of sugar-glazed turnips. Sounds delicious? Maybe. Maybe not. Historians still argue whether the medieval obsession with spices was primarily about flavor, preservation, or social status. I think it was a combination of all three, but the social status aspect was definitely a major factor. It was about showing off your wealth and power, even if it meant sacrificing the taste of your food. The wealthy also drank a lot of wine. Okay, maybe a lot is an understatement. They practically bathed in the stuff. Wine was seen as a sign of sophistication and refinement, and the more you drank, the more sophisticated you were perceived to be. Of course, medieval wine wasn't exactly the smooth, complex beverage you might be imagining. It was often sour, watery, and heavily spiced. But hey, at least it was alcoholic. It's even believed that the aristocracy suffered from gout more than others because their meat-heavy, rich diets meant that uric acid built up in their bodies. The poorer members of society, eating all of those lentils and beans, at least avoided that issue. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that sugar was not widely available. Honey was the most common sweetener, so many desserts would have had a distinct honey taste. If you could even call the dishes desserts. Candied fruit would have been a prized delicacy. So, there you have it. A glimpse into the culinary world of the Middle Ages. A world of bread, gruel, roasted swan, and questionable hygiene. A world where food was as much about survival and social status as it was about sustenance. So, next time you're enjoying a delicious, well-balanced meal, take a moment to appreciate how far we've come. And maybe, just maybe, spare a thought for those poor medieval peasants, gnawing on their day-old bread and dreaming of a world with refrigeration and decent spices. You should be grateful for that fridge, eh? Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about sleep. Or rather, the lack thereof, back in medieval times. Not exactly the silkiest, most restful subject, is it? Think less Tempur-Pedic, more, lumpy hay bale. You trudge wearily into the dimly lit chamber. It's late, or at least, as late as it gets without electricity and Netflix binging. The single tallow candle flickers, casting long, dancing shadows that make the tapestry of questionable hunting scenes even more unnerving. You're bone-tired from a day spent, well, whatever your medieval alter ego spent their day doing. Plowing fields? Sewing tapestries? Dodging stray pigs in the marketplace? Doesn't matter. Fatigue is universal. Now, your bed. Let's examine this masterpiece of rustic charm. It's probably a straw-filled mattress, maybe with a thin wool blanket thrown over it. Think of it as the original yoga mat, firm, unforgiving, and potentially harboring a family of field mice. You poke it tentatively. Yep, definitely lumpy. And is that a twig? Oh, joy. The cold seeps in immediately. You pull the blanket tighter, but it's like trying to trap sunlight in a sieve. Medieval houses, particularly those of the less-than-noble persuasion, were notoriously drafty. No central heating, no double-paned windows, just you, a blanket, and the chilling breath of the outside world snaking through every crack and crevice. Imagine the ASMR potential, but instead of gentle rain sounds, it's the wind whistling through the chinks in the wall. And then there are the guests. You know, the uninvited kind. Bedbugs. Fleas. Lice. Oh my. Think of your mattress as a thriving ecosystem, a bustling metropolis for tiny, bitey inhabitants. It's like having a permanent, miniature tickle fight, except it's not a fight, they're winning, and it's definitely not fun. You scratch instinctively. Yeah, that's about right. Sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs, well, you know. But hey, at least you're not sleeping on the floor, right? That was a common reality for many. Comfort, as we know it, was a luxury. Speaking of luxury, did you know that some medieval lords and ladies actually slept sitting up? Partly because they believed it aided digestion, questionable science, to say the least, and partly to showcase their elaborate bed hangings, which were considered a status symbol. Historians still argue whether this was purely for show, or if genuine medical beliefs played a larger role. Imagine trying to get a good night's sleep propped up like a fancy, bejeweled gargoyle. My neck hurts just thinking about it. Beyond the bed itself, consider the darkness. Or rather, the lack thereof. While you might think you're enveloped in peaceful, inky blackness, remember that medieval towns were rarely completely dark. There might be a flickering lantern outside your window, or the faint glow of a fire in the distance. And, of course, the moon. Moonlight streaming in could be romantic, sure, but it could also cast spooky shadows that played tricks on your weary mind. It's all fun and games until you see a tapestry knight seemingly wink at you. Now, let's talk about sounds. Silence? Forget about it. Medieval towns were noisy places. There was the clatter of carts, the barking of dogs, the shouting of vendors, and the general cacophony of human activity. Even at night, the sounds wouldn't completely cease. You might hear the watchman calling out the hours, or the distant strains of a lute being played in a tavern. And don't forget the livestock. Roosters don't understand the concept of a reasonable wake-up time. And then there's the communal aspect of sleep. Privacy? Not really a thing. Depending on your social standing and the size of your household, you might be sharing a room, or even a bed, with other family members, servants, or even complete strangers. Cozy? Not exactly. Imagine trying to drift off to sleep while your Uncle Bartholomew snores like a chainsaw next to you. The medieval equivalent of a white noise machine, I suppose. Speaking of family, children were often bedded down with their parents until they were much older than we consider normal today. Partly for warmth, partly for space reasons, and partly because, well, birth control wasn't exactly a widespread practice. Think of it as the ultimate sleep-in. Forever. Another thing that likely impacted sleep quality was diet. You're not exactly tucking into a chamomile tea and a light salad before bed. More likely, you've had a hearty stew, maybe some ale, and perhaps a hunk of bread. Which, while delicious and satisfying, isn't exactly conducive to a restful night's sleep. That medieval gut was working overtime while you're trying to wind down, and heartburn was probably a common complaint. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person truly understood the correlation between diet and sleep, or if they just accepted restless nights as a fact of life. Now, let's consider the supernatural. Superstitions were rife in the Middle Ages, and sleep was often seen as a vulnerable time, a portal to the spirit world. People took precautions to ward off evil spirits, such as placing charms under their pillows or reciting prayers before bed. You might even have a handy dream interpretation guide on hand, because who knows what those flickering shadows and twig-filled mattresses are trying to tell you. One quirky belief was that dreaming of specific animals had certain meanings. For example, dreaming of a dog might signify loyalty, while dreaming of a snake could indicate treachery. If you dream of a swarm of bedbugs, well, that probably just means you have a swarm of bedbugs. Interestingly, the concept of a good night's sleep as we understand it may have been different in the Middle Ages. Evidence suggests that segmented sleep was common. This involved sleeping for a few hours, waking for an hour or two to pray, read, or engage in other activities, and then going back to sleep for another few hours. It's like a medieval version of a power nap, but less planned. This could be due to the limitations of artificial light, the rhythm of daily life, or simply a different understanding of sleep itself. And finally, let's not forget the sheer, unrelenting boredom. Medieval life, for most people, was repetitive and monotonous. This likely contributed to a general sense of exhaustion and weariness. You're physically tired, but also mentally drained from the same routines, the same conversations, the same everything. Sleep, even the fitful, uncomfortable kind, was perhaps a welcome escape. So, next time you're snuggled up in your memory foam mattress, under a fluffy duvet, and enjoying the blissful silence of your climate-controlled bedroom, take a moment to appreciate just how luxurious your sleeping arrangements truly are. Because believe me, that medieval straw-filled mattress is starting to sound a lot less appealing now, isn't it? And hey, at least you don't have to worry about waking up with a family of fleas having a picnic on your face. That's a win, right? Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I need a nap. Maybe after a nice long shower, and a thorough delousing. Just in case. Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's talk medieval medicine. Or, as I like to call it, medieval. Maybe evil? You trudge through a muddy lane, the stench of unwashed bodies and open sewers clinging to you like a persistent X. The air is thick, heavy, and you can practically taste the disease swirling around. You're not feeling great. A cough's been nagging at you, and you've got this throbbing sensation behind your eyeballs. It could be anything, really, the plague, a bad batch of ale, or just the general existential dread of living in the 14th century. Either way, you need a doctor. Good luck with that. You finally arrive at the physician's dwelling. It's less of an office and more of a cramped room crammed with jars of questionable substances, dried herbs that smell vaguely of your grandmother's attic, and an assortment of implements that look suspiciously like torture devices. This is it. This is where you put your life in the hands of someone who probably learned everything they know from a slightly deranged barber. The physician, clad in a surprisingly clean, at least, comparatively, robe, eyes you with an air of practiced expertise. He's probably seen it all, from buboes the size of melons to melancholic humors causing excessive gloom. Humors, you ask? Ah yes, the foundation of medieval medicine, the four humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health, according to these learned fellows, depends on the perfect balance of these bodily fluids. And if you're feeling unwell? Well, clearly one of them is out of whack. Historians still argue whether this theory held any actual sway, or if it was just a convenient excuse for doing whatever they felt like. He circles you, sniffing the air like a truffle hog, occasionally poking you with a surprisingly cold finger. It's unsettling. Finally, he pronounces his diagnosis, an excess of blood. Shocking, I know. What's the cure? Bloodletting, naturally. He grabs a gleaming, suspiciously large lancet. Now, bloodletting was the go-to treatment for pretty much anything. Headache? Bloodletting. Fever? Bloodletting. Stubbed toe? You guessed it, bloodletting. They believed that by draining some of your life force, they were also draining the illness. Side effects may include weakness, fainting, and a slightly shorter lifespan. You sit there, staring at this instrument of doom and wondering if a simple prayer to Saint Sebastian would have been a better choice. He slices. A surprisingly large amount of blood gushes forth into a bowl, pooling like dark, viscous wine. He scrutinizes the color and consistency with the intensity of a sommelier judging a fine vintage. Aha, he proclaims. As I suspected, too much red. You, meanwhile, are feeling increasingly lightheaded. Mainstream historical fact, bloodletting was a common practice throughout the Middle Ages, often performed by barbers as well as physicians. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of going to the quick lube for an oil change, but for your veins. Quirky tidbit, some physicians consulted astrological charts to determine the best time to perform bloodletting, believing that the position of the stars influenced the flow of bodily humors. So, if you were born under a bad sign, you were pretty much doomed. After what feels like an eternity, he finally bandages the wound. You're now significantly paler and weaker than before, but hey, at least your humors are slightly more balanced, maybe. He prescribes a concoction of herbs and spices that taste suspiciously like dirt and sadness. Drink this 3 times a day, he instructs, and avoid cold air, strong emotions, and excessive thinking. Easier said than done when you're basically living in a low-budget horror film. Of course, bloodletting wasn't the only trick they had up their sleeves. There was also purging, which involved inducing vomiting or diarrhea to, you guessed it, remove excess humors. Fun times. Think of it as a medieval juice cleanse, but way less glamorous and considerably more explosive. But let's not forget the real star of medieval medicine, prayer. Because when all else failed, which was, let's be honest, most of the time, you could always rely on divine intervention. Every saint had their specialty: Saint Roch for plague, Saint Anthony for skin diseases, Saint Blaise for sore throats. So, if you had a particularly nasty rash, you'd better get to church and start praying to Saint Anthony. It probably wouldn't help, but at least you'd feel like you were doing something. And if you were really unlucky, you might end up in the hands of a trepanner. Trepanning involved drilling a hole in the skull. The theory? To release evil spirits or relieve pressure on the brain. The reality? A quick and painful demise. Historians still argue whether trepanning was actually effective in treating certain conditions, or if it was just a gruesome form of torture disguised as medicine. My guess? The latter. I'm thinking it probably wasn't the evil spirits that were causing the brain pressure. Of course, surgery was a bit of a gamble too. Anesthesia? Non-existent. Sterilization? What's that? Pain management? Biting down on a leather strap and hoping for the best. Surgeons were often barbers or butchers who dabbled in human anatomy on the side. Amputations were common, and performed with a speed that bordered on terrifying. The goal wasn't necessarily to save your life, but to get the job done before you bled out, died of infection, or simply went mad from the pain. On the bright side, you might get a cool wooden leg out of the deal. Mainstream historical fact: monasteries played a significant role in preserving and transmitting medical knowledge during the Middle Ages. They housed libraries filled with ancient texts and often operated as hospitals for the sick. So, if you were feeling unwell, your best bet was to check into a monastery and hope for the best. Sort of like a medieval spa, but with more chanting and less cucumber water. Quirky tidbit: people believed that certain animals possessed medicinal properties. For example, ground-up earthworms were used to treat wounds, and powdered unicorn horn, yes, unicorn, was considered a powerful antidote to poison. Spoiler alert, unicorns don't exist. But that didn't stop people from trying to get their hands on some mythical horn. One wonders what they used to try and cure those delusions. And speaking of delusion, let's talk about the plague. The Black Death. The bubonic plague. Whatever you want to call it, it was a bad time for everyone. Millions died, and the medical community was utterly clueless. They tried everything: bloodletting, purging, prayer, amulets, and even leeching. They used leeches. A lot. Because, you know, if draining some of your blood was good, draining more of your blood must be even better, right? Wrong. One popular theory was that the plague was caused by miasma, or bad air. So, people carried around bouquets of flowers and herbs to ward off the stench and, hopefully, the disease. It's like a medieval version of Febreze, but with a slightly higher chance of triggering allergies. The plague doctor, with their iconic bird-like mask filled with aromatic herbs, became a symbol of the era. The mask was designed to protect them from the miasma, but it probably did little more than make them look slightly more terrifying. Historians still argue whether the plague was caused solely by bubonic plague or if other diseases contributed to the pandemic. Whatever the cause, it was a devastating blow to Europe, wiping out a significant portion of the population and leaving a lasting impact on society. You consider yourself lucky you only have a cough. For now, you suppose. And that, my friends, is just a brief glimpse into the wonderful world of medieval medicine. Brutal? Yes. Ineffective? Often. Painful? Absolutely. But hey, at least they were trying, sort of. You hobble back towards your hovel, clutching your dirt-flavored medicine. Perhaps a good night's sleep, and a strong dose of denial will do the trick. You just hope your symptoms aren't too far advanced before a better solution is proposed. Probably leeches. Actually, never mind. Time for a long, long sleep. Good night. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk travel. Medieval travel. And, oh boy, are you in for a treat. A treat that probably involves dysentery and possibly getting your head bashed in by bandits. Doesn't that sound relaxing? No? Okay, well, grab your imaginary walking stick, because you're coming with me anyway. Imagine this, you're standing at the edge of your village, ready to embark on a journey. Maybe you're a merchant heading to the next town over to sell your wares, a pilgrim on your way to a holy site, or just some poor sap who got kicked out of their village for, well, reasons. Doesn't matter. What matters is you're about to experience the joys of medieval travel. First things first, forget everything you know about comfortable shoes. Seriously. Those supple leather boots you're picturing? They'll be shredded within a day. You're probably stuck with rough, clunky things, maybe stuffed with straw if you're lucky. And socks? If you have them, they're probably made of wool and perpetually damp. So, you trudge onward, each step a little reminder that life is short, and your feet are already regretting all your decisions. The roads, well, they're not exactly highways. Think more like muddy tracks, barely wider than a cart. Depending on the weather, you might be ankle-deep in mud, slipping and sliding with every step. In the summer, dust kicks up with every footfall, coating your throat and turning you into a human sandpaper dispenser. It's all very picturesque, if you're into that sort of thing. Now, the speed. Forget about zipping along at 70 miles per hour. We're talking a brisk walking pace, maybe 2 to 3 miles an hour if you're really pushing it. You'll be lucky to cover 15 to 20 miles in a day. So, that pilgrimage to Canterbury? Yeah, pack a lunch. Pack several lunches. Pack enough lunches to sustain a small army. But hey, at least you get to enjoy the scenery, right? Well, maybe. If scenery to you means endless fields, dense forests full of things, and the occasional dilapidated village, then you're in for a visual feast. Oh, and let's not forget the smells. Between the livestock, the lack of sanitation, and the ever-present aroma of unwashed bodies, your nose will be working overtime. It's like a sensory overload of unpleasantness. And then there's the company. Unless you're traveling alone, which is generally a bad idea, you're likely to be surrounded by a motley crew of fellow travelers. There's the overly pious pilgrim, constantly droning on about their sins. There's the suspiciously shifty-eyed merchant, clutching their purse a little too tightly. And there's always that guy, the one who can't stop talking and has a truly unsettling laugh. Speaking of dangers, let's get to those, shall we? Bandits were a constant threat. They'd hide in forests or lurk along lonely stretches of road, waiting for unsuspecting travelers like yourself. And they weren't exactly polite about it. A quick stand and deliver was probably the best-case scenario. More likely, it involved a swift club to the head and a thorough ransacking of your belongings. Which, let's be honest, probably weren't worth all that much in the first place. I mean, you're traveling in a time when a loaf of bread was considered a valuable asset. Navigation was another challenge. Maps, if they existed at all, were often inaccurate and fanciful. You were more likely to rely on landmarks, local knowledge, and the questionable directions of strangers. Just follow the river for 3 days, then turn left at the big oak tree. You can't miss it. Famous last words. And let's not forget the weather. Rain, snow, scorching heat, medieval travelers faced it all, with little protection. You might have a cloak, maybe a hat, but that's about it. There were no Gore-Tex jackets or climate-controlled cars. You just had to grin and bear it. And probably catch a cold while you were at it. Now, about food and lodging. Forget about Michelin-starred restaurants and cozy hotels. Your options were limited to whatever you could carry with you, forage along the way, or buy from the occasional roadside inn. And inn is putting it generously. Think more like a dimly lit, flea-infested hovel with questionable food and even more questionable characters. Sleep involved sharing a room with a dozen strangers, listening to their snores and farts all night long. Ah, the joys of communal living. Water was another concern. Clean water, that is. You were more likely to drink from a stream or well, hoping it wasn't contaminated with, well, anything. Let's just say that dysentery was a common travel companion. It was pretty much the medieval equivalent of a frequent flyer program, but instead of miles, you accumulated, well, you get the idea. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. The Silk Road was a major trade route connecting the East and West during the medieval period. It wasn't just one road, but a network of routes spanning thousands of miles. Think of it as the medieval internet, but with more camels and less cat videos. And here's a quirky tidbit: people believed that certain animals could predict the weather, and therefore, help you know the time to travel. Observing the behavior of pigs, for instance, was thought to reveal impending rain. So, next time you see a pig acting strangely, you might want to grab your umbrella. Who knew pigs were such astute meteorologists? Historians still argue whether the benefits of increased trade outweighed the risks and hardships of long-distance travel during the medieval period. Was it worth braving bandits, disease, and terrible food just to get your hands on some spices from the East? It's a question that has plagued scholars for centuries. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Travel also offered opportunities for adventure, discovery, and cultural exchange. You got to see new places, meet new people, and learn about different ways of life. It broadened your horizons, even if it also broadened your chances of getting robbed. There were also some practical inventions that made travel slightly less miserable. The compass, for example, helped travelers navigate more accurately. The development of better roads and bridges made journeys a little smoother. And the rise of towns and cities provided more places to rest and resupply. And don't forget about the knights, those armored protectors. Okay, so maybe they weren't always protecting you. Sometimes they were the ones causing trouble. But hey, at least they looked impressive, right? A knight in shining armor is always a sight to behold, unless you're the one he's about to run through with a lance. Here's a joke for you. Why did the medieval traveler bring a ladder on their journey? Because they wanted to go to higher places. Okay, so I told you they were gentle jokes. I mentioned pilgrimages earlier. These were journeys to holy sites, undertaken for religious reasons. Pilgrims traveled to places like Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago de Compostela, seeking forgiveness for their sins or hoping for a miracle. And they did it all on foot, of course. Talk about dedication. And here's another quirky fact: some people believed that certain diseases could be cured by touching the relics of saints. So, if you were suffering from a bad case of the plague, you might try rubbing yourself against a saint's bone. I'm not sure how effective it was, but hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Plus, the saint probably appreciated the attention. Historians still debate whether the rise of pilgrimage was driven more by genuine religious fervor or by the desire for adventure and travel. Were people truly seeking spiritual enlightenment, Or were they just looking for a good excuse to get out of town? Probably a bit of both, to be honest. But let's face it, medieval travel was hard. It was slow, dangerous, and exhausting. It required a lot of planning, preparation, and sheer determination. But it was also an essential part of medieval life. It facilitated trade, spread ideas, and connected people from different parts of the world. So, the next time you're stuck in traffic, just remember that things could be a lot worse. You could be trudging through mud, dodging bandits, and trying to avoid dysentery. And frankly, that doesn't sound fun at all. One more joke. What do you call a knight who's afraid to fight? Surrender. Okay, I'm really scraping the barrel here. But seriously, the unsung heroes of medieval travel were the animals. Horses, oxen, donkeys, they carried people, goods, and supplies over long distances. They were the workhorses of the medieval world, quite literally. And they deserve a lot of credit for making travel possible. And here's a final quirky fact: some medieval travelers believed that carrying a rabbit's foot would bring them good luck. So, if you happen to stumble across a dead rabbit, you might want to snag its foot. Just saying. Probably not the luckiest thing for the rabbit, though. Historians still debate the long-term impact of medieval travel on the development of European society. Did it contribute to the spread of new technologies and ideas, or did it simply reinforce existing social and economic structures? It's a complex question with no easy answer. Okay, friend, I think we've reached the end of our journey for tonight. You've endured the mud, the bandits, the questionable food, and my terrible jokes. You've earned your rest. So, settle into your comfy bed, appreciate your clean water, and be thankful that you're not traveling in the Middle Ages. Sleep tight, and don't let the bedbugs bite. Or the bandits. Alright, settle in, friend. Let's talk about tools. Not spreadsheets, not power drills, real tools. The kind that make problems disappear. You're an assassin, after all, or at least we're pretending you are for the sake of this little thought experiment. And every good assassin knows their gear is as important as their, let's say their, discretion. You trudge through the pre-dawn mist, the chill clinging to your bones despite the layers you're wearing. The weight of your kit digs into your shoulders, not exactly what you pictured when you envisioned a life of shadowy intrigue, was it? Probably dreamt of sleek gadgets and silent precision. Think James Bond, but instead you feel like you're cosplaying a Sherpa. The reality is, often the most effective tools for the job aren't exactly cutting edge. Take, for instance, the classic crossbow. Thunk. Simple, right? A bow mounted on a stock. But yours, oh yours, is a hefty beast. The draw weight alone requires a dedicated winding mechanism. Every crank is a groan of strained metal, a potential alarm bell in the stillness. And the bolts? Fletched with goose feathers, each one lovingly, and expensively, crafted, but about as aerodynamic as a brick if you get caught in a crosswind. You carefully check the string for fraying again. It's a constant worry, a weak point that could ruin everything at the worst possible moment. Think of it like a bad Wi-Fi connection, but with more piercing consequences. The thing is, crossbows have a long and storied history. Used extensively in medieval warfare. You might have even seen one mounted as a decorative piece, but its use isn't limited to this. Think of it as an early version of the sniper rifle, offering greater accuracy and power than a traditional bow, especially in untrained hands. But here's the quirky bit. Some historians actually believe the Chinese invented something resembling a repeating crossbow centuries before the European version became widespread. Imagine that, a fully automatic crossbow. One theory suggests, though, that their use was less about military dominance and more about bird hunting. Seems a little underwhelming, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the crossbow's impact on medieval warfare is overstated. Some believe it rendered heavily armored knights obsolete, leveling the playing field for common soldiers. Others argue that its slow rate of fire and susceptibility to wet conditions limited its effectiveness. Either way, you're left to deal with the real-world impact of its imperfections, especially in this damn morning mist. Now, let's not forget your trusty sidearm. Forget those Hollywood silencers. Yours is a hulking arquebus pistol. Loading it is a delicate, time-consuming dance of pouring powder, ramming a ball down the barrel, and priming the pan. Each step a risk, each fumble a potential disaster. And the noise? Forget stealth. The roar of gunpowder is enough to announce your presence to the entire neighborhood. It makes your ears ring just thinking about it. You wouldn't want to forget your earplugs for this part, but hey, you probably forgot it anyway. This particular weapon is a replica, of course. But it's based on those used back in the 16th century. Imagine the assassins of the day lugging this kind of thing around. It makes you wonder how they managed to be effective at all. The key, of course, was understanding the weapon's limitations. Knowing its range, its accuracy, and, crucially, its reliability. Which, let's be honest, wasn't great. Interestingly, the evolution of firearms wasn't a linear progression of improvements. There were bizarre detours and dead ends. Did you know that there were firearms designed to fire multiple bullets at once, effectively turning them into early shotguns? Talk about a waste of resources. They were unwieldy, inaccurate, and prone to exploding. But, hey, at least they made a statement. Historians still debate the role of technological innovation versus social factors in shaping the evolution of weapons. Was it purely about finding more efficient ways to kill? Or were factors like cost, availability of materials, and even social status more influential? Whatever the answer, you're now stuck with this historical artifact of death. And then there's your knife. A simple, unassuming dagger. But even this seemingly straightforward tool has its drawbacks. It needs constant sharpening. The handle needs to be kept dry to maintain a firm grip. And the blade needs to be cleaned meticulously after each use, if you want to avoid corrosion. Not the easiest job in the field. Not something you probably thought about when you were deciding on this career path. Who would have thought cleaning your equipment would be part of the job? The knife is the oldest weapon in human history, dating back to the Stone Age. Even in our modern era, it remains a universal tool for both utility and self-defense. It's the ultimate backup plan, the silent partner in your deadly dance. While technology is always evolving, the knife's value endures as a testament to its simplicity and adaptability. Fun fact, some cultures imbue knives with spiritual significance. The kris, a traditional Indonesian dagger, is believed to possess magical powers and is considered a sacred object. It is said that they can be passed down through generations, carrying the spirits of ancestors. Historians still debate the origins of the ritualistic use of knives in different cultures. Was it purely practical, driven by the need for hunting and survival? Or was there a deeper, symbolic meaning associated with the weapon, reflecting humanity's relationship with life and death? Probably a bit of both, huh? Finally, you reach into your pack and pull out a small vial. A colorless, odorless liquid. Your poison. The key ingredient to making everything go to plan. Now, you did remember to bring it, didn't you? It's amazing how often assassins forget this crucial component. Don't worry, I do it all the time too. Poisons have been used for centuries as a means of assassination, with varying degrees of effectiveness. Ancient civilizations like the Egyptians and Romans were known to experiment with various toxins, often derived from plants or animals. Cleopatra, perhaps one of the most famous rulers in Egypt, supposedly experimented with different types of poisons on her servants to test their effects. Now that is taking quality control to a whole new level. A lesser-known fact, some historians theorize that the decline of the Roman Empire was hastened by lead poisoning. The Romans used lead extensively in their plumbing and cooking utensils, and the cumulative effect of this exposure could have led to widespread health problems and cognitive decline. Historians still argue about the extent to which lead poisoning contributed to the fall of Rome. Some believe it was a significant factor, while others downplay its importance, citing other reasons such as political instability and economic decline. But the point is, even the most advanced civilizations are susceptible to the dangers of unseen toxins. So there you have it. Your tools of the trade. Heavy, unreliable, and potentially self-destructive. But in the right hands, with the right knowledge, they can get the job done. Now, the target awaits. Good luck, friend. You're going to need it. And, try not to break anything, alright? Alright, settle in, settle in. Let's talk about communication. Specifically, how you, the elite, globe-trotting assassin, deal with the, shall we say, linguistic diversity out there. You can't exactly walk into a bustling marketplace in Marrakesh and ask, "Excuse me, where can I find a discreet poison merchant," in perfect Queen's English, now can you? That's just bad OPSEC. You trudge off the plane, the humid air of Bangkok already clinging to you like a lovesick leech. The scent of street food, a symphony of sweet, sour, and suspicious, assaults your nostrils. The sounds? A cacophony. Tuk-tuks whine, vendors hawk their wares in rapid-fire Thai, and a distant karaoke bar belts out a mournful ballad. Your target is somewhere in this mess, and you need information. But first, you need to understand what people are saying. The first instinct, of course, is to rely on technology. You reach into your impeccably organized gear bag, seriously, it's a work of art, and pull out your trusty translator earpiece. Sleek, discreet, and supposedly capable of real-time translation. Supposedly. Because let's be honest, these things are only as good as their programming, and their programming is usually only as good as the cheapest programmer they could find in Bangalore. You remember that time in Rome when your earpiece translated "buongiorno" as "burn your nose, you moron." It almost blew your cover. Almost. You recovered, of course, blaming it on a sudden allergy attack. But the glares from the nanas? Unforgiving. Anyway, you activate the earpiece, clear your throat, and attempt a simple greeting in broken Thai. Sawwas di crap, you manage, which you think means, hello, but could very well mean, I am a tourist, please overcharge me. The vendor, a wizened woman with eyes that have seen too much and a smile that could charm a cobra, responds in a torrent of Thai that sounds like a hummingbird trapped in a washing machine. The earpiece sputters. It manages to pick up a few words: foreigner, price, very special. The rest is a jumbled mess of digital static. Great. So much for cutting-edge technology. It seems you're back to relying on the universal language of pointing and gesturing. Ah, the joys of nonverbal communication. You point at a particularly fragrant-looking skewer of something unidentifiable and raise your eyebrows questioningly. The vendor nods vigorously, then quotes you a price that seems exorbitant. You haggle, using a combination of hand signals and exaggerated facial expressions. It's a clumsy dance, but eventually, you reach an agreement. You hand over the baht, grab the skewer, and try not to think too much about what you're actually eating. Historically, the need to communicate across language barriers has been a driving force behind cultural exchange and, let's be real, conquest. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, was instrumental in deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs, opening up a whole new understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. Imagine trying to understand a civilization without understanding its language. It would be like trying to bake a cake without a recipe. You might end up with something edible, but it probably wouldn't be very good. Which brings us to language learning. Now, I know what you're thinking, I'm an assassin, not a linguist. I have more important things to do than conjugate verbs. And you're right, mostly. But a basic understanding of the local language can be invaluable. Even a few phrases can make a huge difference. Excuse me, thank you, where is the nearest toilet? These are all essential. And, of course, I am not a cop. That one comes in handy more often than you'd think. You see, it's not just about understanding the words, it's about understanding the culture. Language is inextricably linked to culture, and knowing how to speak to someone in their own language shows respect. It builds rapport. And, in your line of work, rapport can be the difference between success and a messy situation. Now, some of you may be thinking, why not just learn every language? Well, good luck with that. There are thousands of languages spoken around the world, and some of them are incredibly complex. Basque, for example, is a language isolate, meaning it's not related to any other known language. Its origins are a complete mystery. Historians still argue whether Basque predates Indo-European languages in Europe, which makes it the linguistic equivalent of finding a dinosaur fossil in your backyard. Neat, but doesn't help you order a coffee in Madrid. But even if you could master every language, you'd still be dealing with dialects, slang, and regional variations. Take English, for example. You might be fluent in American English, but try ordering a biscuit in Scotland. You'll end up with something that looks suspiciously like a scone, and a very confused waiter. You recall that mission in Glasgow where you were supposed to meet a contact at a pub. You asked the bartender for a pint of lager, which he understood perfectly. However, when you asked for a fag, expecting a cigarette, you were met with a raised eyebrow and a muttered comment about cheeky Sassenachs. Turns out, fag has a slightly different connotation in Scotland. Lesson learned, always do your research. And that's another important point, context. You can know all the words in the world, but if you don't understand the context in which they're being used, you're going to misunderstand something. Someone might tell you, "I'm just dying," after hearing a joke. They're not actually dying, hopefully. Now, there's a darker side to linguistic barriers. They can be used to manipulate, to control, to divide. Propaganda, for example, often relies on twisting language to shape public opinion. Misinformation, deliberately spread through false translations, can have devastating consequences. You remember reading about the War of the Worlds radio broadcast in 1938. Orson Welles' dramatization of a Martian invasion caused widespread panic, in part because listeners misinterpreted the language used in the broadcast. They thought it was real. A chilling reminder of the power of words, and the importance of understanding them correctly. You pause, taking a sip of lukewarm water. The artificial air conditioning hums around you, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the city outside. You consider the challenges ahead. You need to find your target, gather information, and complete your mission, all while navigating a labyrinth of languages and cultural nuances. You need to find a local who knows your target's whereabouts. You decide to hit a bar, the seedier the better. You find one that looks promising, neon lights flickering, loud music blaring, and a general atmosphere of moral ambiguity. You order a drink, something strong and local. You observe. You listen. You wait. The art of eavesdropping is crucial. You strain to catch snippets of conversation, piecing together fragments of information. You listen for key words, names, locations, anything that might be relevant to your mission. Even if you don't understand every word, you can often get a sense of the tone, the mood, the underlying message. You hear two men arguing in rapid-fire Thai. You can't understand the words, but you can tell they're discussing something important, something contentious. You watch their body language, their facial expressions. You notice one of them glances nervously in your direction. You make a mental note. Later, you approach the bartender, a burly man with tattoos and a weary expression. You attempt to engage him in conversation, using your limited Thai and a generous tip. He's initially wary, but gradually warms up. You ask him about the men you overheard arguing. He hesitates, then shrugs. "Just business," he says, in heavily accented English. "Nothing for you to worry about." You press him gently. You offer him more money. He looks around nervously, then leans in close. They were talking about something dangerous, he whispers. Something you don't want to get involved in. You know you're on the right track. Now, I know what you're thinking, but isn't bribery wrong? Well, yes, technically. But you're an assassin. You've made peace with ethical ambiguities a long time ago. Also, bribery is a tale as old as time. For centuries, diplomats and spies have used bribes to gain access to information, influence decisions, and generally make their lives easier. It's a pragmatic solution to a complex problem. It's also illegal in most countries, so, don't get caught. Anyway, the bartender gives you a name, an address, and a warning. Be careful, he says. These people are not to be trifled with. You thank him, leave a generous tip, and disappear into the night. You now have a lead, a thread to pull. Okay, settle in, friend. Let's just ease into this topic, shall we? Constant surveillance. The idea that you're never really alone. Doesn't that just send a shiver down your spine? Not a bad shiver, I hope. More of a, that's unsettling, kind of shiver. Let's consider that shiver a little brain tickle. You wake up. The gentle hum of your refrigerator is the first thing you hear. It's almost soothing, isn't it? That constant, quiet reassurance that the milk is still cold, the leftovers haven't staged a microbial coup overnight. You reach for your phone, of course. It's practically glued to your hand at this point. The bright screen flashes, displaying notifications vying for your attention, emails, news alerts, a cat video your aunt sent you, again. You unlock it with your fingerprint or, more likely, your face. Bam! You're already being watched. The phone is just one portal, though, isn't it? Think about all the data points you generate before you even leave the house. Your smart thermostat is meticulously tracking your temperature preferences. Your smart coffee maker is analyzing your caffeine intake patterns, judging you silently, probably. And don't even get me started on your smart toothbrush. Is that really necessary? Are we so incapable of brushing our teeth properly that we need an AI overlord to monitor our plaque removal efficiency? I mean, come on. Even that innocuous fridge hum is contributing. Smart refrigerators, you see, are now a thing. They can track what you're running low on, automatically reorder groceries, which is convenient, I'll admit, and, inevitably, collect data about your dietary habits. Historians still argue whether the rise of data collection is a natural evolution of technology or a deliberate erosion of privacy. But honestly, does it even matter at this point? The toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak. Or, the yogurt is already in the refrigerator's database. You step outside. Now the real fun begins. Traffic cameras are capturing your car's license plate. Facial recognition technology is becoming increasingly prevalent in public spaces, airports, shopping malls, even some city streets. Everything is recorded, stored, analyzed. Ever feel like the world is a stage and all the men and women merely players? Well, thanks to surveillance, it's more like a reality show where you are the star, whether you auditioned or not. Fun fact, the first instance of CCTV was used in Germany in 1942 to observe the testing of V-2 rockets. Not exactly a feel-good origin story, is it? Let's talk about work. You arrive at the office. Keycard entry logs your arrival time. Your computer tracks your keystrokes, your browsing history, your email correspondence. Some companies even monitor employee activity with software that can detect signs of stress or fatigue. It's like working in a digital panopticon, a prison designed so inmates never know if they're being watched at any given moment. Just imagine, Big Brother is watching you watching cat videos during your lunch break. Maybe that's why productivity is so high these days. Or maybe everyone's just really good at minimizing the browser window when the boss walks by. And it's not just your employer. Think about your internet service provider. They have access to a staggering amount of information about your online activity, the websites you visit, the videos you watch, the products you purchase. They could probably build a pretty accurate profile of you, your interests, your anxieties, your deepest, darkest Google searches. Consider social media. Oh, social media. That glorious, addictive vortex of likes, shares, and carefully curated self-portraits. Every post, every comment, every emoji is meticulously catalogued. Algorithms analyze your behavior, predicting your preferences, feeding you content designed to keep you scrolling, keep you engaged, keep you buying things. Did you know the U.S. Department of Defense used social media for overseas propaganda as early as 2011? It's all about shaping perception, isn't it? Even your seemingly harmless posts can be used to build a profile of your political leanings, your social connections, your vulnerabilities. It's a bit like writing a love letter to a data broker. A very public love letter. And then there's the Internet of Things. Your smart TV, your smart watch, your smart everything. They're all connected, all transmitting data, all contributing to this ever-growing digital dossier on you. Even your vacuum cleaner is probably mapping your house right now. I wonder if they judge our cleaning habits. My Roomba certainly acts like it's judging me. You know, that slow, disapproving beep when it gets stuck under the couch? The potential for misuse is obvious. This data can be used for targeted advertising, of course. But it can also be used for more nefarious purposes, political manipulation, discriminatory practices, even outright surveillance by governments or corporations. And once that data is out there, it's virtually impossible to erase. It's like that embarrassing photo from your freshman year of college. It might be buried deep in Facebook, but it's still there, lurking, waiting to be unearthed at the most inopportune moment. Of course, there are arguments in favor of all this surveillance. It can help prevent crime, enhance security, improve efficiency. Facial recognition technology, for instance, can be used to identify criminals and terrorists. Data analysis can help predict and prevent outbreaks of disease. And targeted advertising, well, some people actually like getting personalized recommendations. I have yet to meet those people, mind you, but I'm sure they exist. Probably browsing this page right now. Hello. The issue isn't necessarily the technology itself. It's the lack of transparency, the lack of control, the lack of understanding about how our data is being used. We're essentially sleepwalking into a world where our every move is tracked, analyzed, and monetized. And most of us don't even realize it's happening. Or, if we do, we feel powerless to stop it. It's just the price we pay for convenience, right? The price we pay for staying connected. We must remember that the French Revolution happened because of the surveillance state that the monarchy had created, and this led to the infamous Reign of Terror. People were sick and tired of being monitored and controlled. Historians still argue whether the benefits of surveillance outweigh the risks. But it is a question each individual must address as well. So, what can you do? Well, you can start by being more mindful about the data you generate. Adjust your privacy settings on social media. Use a VPN to encrypt your internet traffic. Be wary of smart devices that collect more data than you need. Support organizations that are fighting for digital privacy rights. And, perhaps most importantly, talk to your friends and family about these issues. Awareness is the first step towards change. It's not about becoming a Luddite and smashing all your technology. It's about being a conscious and informed consumer. It's about demanding greater transparency and accountability from the companies and governments that are collecting our data. It's about reclaiming our digital privacy, one small step at a time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think I'll go put a piece of tape over my webcam. Just in case. You know, for the brain tickles. You trudge through the narrow, cobblestone alley, the damp air clinging to your face like a forgotten dream. Each footfall echoes, a lonely drumbeat in the pre-dawn quiet. You're dressed in the familiar dark robes, the hood pulled low, obscuring your face. You feel the weight of the hidden blade beneath your sleeve, cold and unforgiving against your skin. It's always cold, isn't it? Like a metal lover, or an acquaintance you only talk to for a promotion. This isn't just a job. It's a calling, a commitment to, what exactly? The greater good, that nebulous, ever-shifting concept they keep shoving down your throat. You tell yourself it's worth it. You have to tell yourself it's worth it, otherwise the crushing weight of what you do might become unbearable. You take a deep breath, trying to find a sliver of justification in the pre-dawn air. Maybe the birds will give you an answer. Maybe a squirrel. You laugh at the thought. Squirrels these days are lucky to find a nut. Tonight's target is a wealthy merchant, a man known for exploiting his workers and hoarding grain while the poor starve. You've seen the reports, the evidence meticulously gathered by your brothers and sisters. He deserves it. Intel says he's in the habit of taking a late-night stroll to his favorite bakery, a man of simple pleasures, apparently, before retiring for the night. You would call him predictable, but your boss would ask you to call him reliable. You settle into the shadows, patient as a cat, waiting for your prey to appear. This whole greater good thing, though, it gnaws at you. It's never quite as clean-cut as they make it out to be. You know, King Henry VIII, of divorce and beheading fame? He claimed he was acting for the greater good of England when he dissolved the monasteries and seized their wealth. Historians still argue whether it was genuine religious zeal or just a massive land grab. Whatever it was, innocent people suffered. Sound familiar? You start to hear things. It's the sound of your conscience getting bigger, maybe? The merchant appears, his silhouette framed by the flickering gaslight. He's a portly man, draped in expensive furs, his breath misting in the cold air. He hums a jaunty tune, completely oblivious to the danger lurking just a few feet away. He's practically skipping, like he's off to meet someone at the park. You wish you could be that happy. You tighten your grip on the hidden blade. This is it. The moment of truth. One swift strike, and the world will be a slightly better place, right? You rehearse the motions in your mind, a deadly ballet you've performed countless times. It's like baking a cake, really. Except you're the oven, and they're the cake. But tonight, something feels different. A sliver of doubt creeps into your mind, a tiny crack in the wall of certainty you've so carefully constructed. You watch him as he stops outside the bakery, his face illuminated by the warm glow of the window. He buys a loaf of bread and offers a generous tip to the baker, a young woman with tired eyes. She smiles gratefully, her face lighting up. That can't be your target, can it? A thought, unbidden and unwelcome, pops into your head. Maybe he's not as evil as they say. Maybe he's just a flawed human being, like everyone else. Maybe, just maybe, there's more to the story than you've been told. This isn't something your boss would want you to think about. It's funny, isn't it? How easily we're willing to believe the worst about people, especially when it suits our purpose. Take the Salem witch trials, for example. Accusations flew like poison darts, fueled by fear and paranoia. Innocent women were condemned to death based on flimsy evidence and hysterical claims. But really, you know that there had to be at least one actual witch that got away with everything, right? Come on. Think about it. Your mind races. You can't ignore the doubt nagging at you. This is not the way of an assassin, the way of the creed. Should you proceed with the mission, silencing your conscience and trusting in the wisdom of your superiors? Or should you follow your gut, risking everything to uncover the truth? You take a step back, retreating further into the shadows. The merchant walks on, disappearing around the corner. The moment has passed. You curse yourself for your hesitation, your weakness. You're not getting soft, are you? You know, sometimes you wish life had a pause button. Or maybe a rewind button. Or how about a skip button? You think about the people in history that made choices that had a big effect on things. Like, what if Archduke Franz Ferdinand had just called in sick that day in Sarajevo? Would the 20th century have looked completely different? You shudder at the thought. You consider your options. You could report back, claiming that the opportunity never presented itself. A convenient lie, easily swallowed. But the lie will sit with you, a constant weight on your soul. You start to hear things again. Or you could investigate further, digging deeper into the merchant's affairs, seeking out the truth for yourself. But that could take time that your superiors might not be willing to give you. And what if you find that the merchant is guilty? What if all the evidence points to his corruption and cruelty? Would you be able to carry out the mission then, knowing that your doubts were unfounded? This is so messed up. You feel like you need a drink. The choice is yours, and yours alone. You feel the weight of the world, and of the creed, resting heavily on your shoulders. What do you want to do? The burden is unbearable. Your stomach rumbles. Maybe you should get a snack. You're starting to realize that the greater good isn't some abstract concept. It's about individual choices, about the consequences of your actions, about the fine line between justice and vengeance. It's interesting, though, isn't it, how different people and groups have tried to define morality. In ancient Sparta, abandoning weak or deformed infants was considered acceptable, even necessary, for the greater good of the state. So maybe you should abandon something? A sandwich, maybe? Historians still argue whether this practice was as widespread as some accounts suggest, or whether it was simply a matter of Spartan propaganda. Still, though, it's not a great feeling to be abandoned. The dawn begins to break, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The city awakens, slowly stretching and yawning, oblivious to the moral battle raging within you. You take one last look down the alleyway, then turn and walk away, the weight of your decision, or indecision, pressing down on you. The world is spinning. And it's almost time for breakfast. Alright, hey there, history buffs and comfy couch commanders. Settle in, pull that blanket up, yeah, the fuzzy one, because tonight we're diving headfirst into the wonderfully messy, occasionally terrifying, and always fascinating world of medieval political intrigue. You might think modern politics are a snake pit, but trust me, back in the day, the snakes had swords, and the pit had, well, probably mud. Lots of mud. You trudge through the gates of a bustling medieval city. The smell, a delightful cocktail of unwashed bodies, livestock, and open sewers, hits you like a velvet-covered hammer. Ah, ambience. You wrinkle your nose, but hey, at least the mead's cheap. You're here, ostensibly, as a merchant. Silk, spices, maybe a few suspiciously cheap relics for the gullible pilgrims passing through. Your real job, however, is a little more nuanced. You're a spy. Or, if we're being fancy, diplomatic envoy with specialized observation skills. Yeah, that sounds way cooler. Your task? To navigate the treacherous currents of shifting alliances between the local lord, Duke Bartholomew the Unpredictable, let's call him, and the neighboring kingdom of Eldoria, ruled by the oh-so-dignified Queen Isolde. Historians still argue whether the concept of a nation-state truly existed in the way we understand it today during this period. Loyalties were fluid, borders were fuzzy, and alliances were often held together by little more than a shared hatred of the same neighboring kingdom. Which, in this case, is, well, pretty much everyone. Your contact, a shifty-eyed fellow named Thomas, meets you in a dimly lit tavern. The floor is sticky, the ale is lukewarm, and the lute player is clearly having a bad day. He slips you a sealed scroll. You casually glance around, making sure no one's paying you too much attention. Inside, a coded message: the Duke favors falcons. The Queen, doves. Watch the birds. Right. Cryptic. Fantastic. You feel like you're about to solve the world's most boring riddle. But you know this is how the game is played. Everything is a sign. Every gesture a possible betrayal. Every drunken ballad a carefully planted piece of propaganda. It's around this time you remember the one thing you're always forgetting to bring on espionage missions: a bird identification guide. Do falcons even look significantly different from hawks at a distance? And you're pretty sure you saw a pigeon earlier. Does that even count? You briefly consider asking Thomas, but decide against it. He looks like the type who'd charge you extra for obvious information. Now, here's something that might surprise you. While we often picture medieval diplomacy as a series of grand feasts and formal declarations, one of the most common methods of cementing alliances was, believe it or not, marriage. Royal weddings were huge political events, often involving years of negotiations over dowries, land rights, and, of course, the thorny issue of who gets to sit at the head table. It was like a more violent, less televised version of Say Yes to the Dress. And speaking of dress, you attend a feast thrown by Duke Bartholomew. The spread is lavish: roast boar, spiced wine, questionable-looking pies filled with something. You mingle, observe, and try not to spill anything on your ridiculously expensive silk doublet. Remember, you're a merchant. You have an image to uphold. You spot the Duke. He's a burly man with a booming laugh and a disconcerting habit of staring directly into people's souls. And on his wrist, you see it, a magnificent falcon, hooded and perched regally. Okay, falcon. Check. You attempt to engage the Duke in conversation, dropping subtle hints about the prosperity of trade with Eldoria. He grunts, takes a massive bite of boar, and replies, "Eldoria? Bah! That woman is as prickly as a thistle." You manage a polite smile. "Indeed, your grace. Thistles do possess a certain, rustic charm. Smooth, you think to yourself. Real smooth." The Duke then proceeds to regale you with a rambling story about a hunting trip gone wrong involving a particularly stubborn badger and a rather unfortunate incident involving his favorite hunting dog and some, let's just say, sensitive foliage. You nod attentively, desperately trying to remember the relevant details for your report. Badger? Dog? Foliage? It all sounds vaguely incriminating. Here's a little-known fact. Medieval rulers often employed court jesters not just for entertainment, but also as a means of delivering potentially dangerous messages. A well-placed joke could be used to criticize a policy, mock a rival, or even warn the king of a conspiracy. Basically, they were the medieval version of political cartoonists, only with more juggling. Though there were likely some political cartoonists who could juggle as well. It's a niche skill set. Later that evening, you manage to secure an audience with one of Queen Isolde's emissaries, a slender woman named Lady Annalise. She is, shall we say, the exact opposite of Duke Bartholomew. Refined, elegant, and radiating an aura of quiet intelligence. And, oh look, she's wearing a brooch in the shape of a dove. Bingo! Lady Annalise speaks in hushed tones, her words carefully chosen. She expresses concern about the Duke's increasingly belligerent rhetoric and hints at the possibility of a mutually beneficial agreement between Eldoria and certain factions within the Duke's court who might, shall we say, prefer a more peaceful approach to regional politics. In other words, she's suggesting a coup. Politely, of course. With impeccable manners and a perfectly coiffed hairstyle. You listen intently, taking mental notes. This is getting interesting. And complicated. You feel a sudden urge to consult a flow chart. Now, this is where things get tricky. Because you have to decide whose side you're on. Or, perhaps more accurately, which side is more likely to win. You weigh your options. The Duke is powerful, but unpredictable. The Queen is subtle, but potentially ruthless. You could play it safe, remain neutral, and hope for the best. But that's not really in your nature, is it? Besides, neutrality rarely pays well. Here's a fun fact: in some medieval courts, spies, and informants were often rewarded with titles, lands, or even positions of power. Not exactly the most glamorous career path, but hey, free real estate. Suddenly, you notice something odd. One of the Duke's guards, a hulking brute with a scar across his face, is watching you. He's been watching you for a while. And he doesn't look happy. You make eye contact with Lady Annalise. A flicker of, what is that? Recognition? Alarm? Fear? Crosses her face. She subtly shakes her head. Time to go. You murmur your excuses, bow politely, and melt back into the crowd. You feel the guard's eyes on your back. You tell yourself it's just paranoia. You're almost out of the hall when you hear it, a shout, followed by the unmistakable sound of clashing steel. Chaos erupts. People scream, tables are overturned, and the feast descends into a full-blown brawl. You spot the scarred guard pushing his way through the crowd, his eyes fixed on you. Okay, maybe it wasn't paranoia. You dart into a dark alleyway, dodging flying goblets and the occasional stray punch. You hear the guard's heavy footsteps pounding behind you. You're in a maze of narrow streets, your heart pounding in your chest. You're not a fighter. You're a spy. Your weapon is information, not a sword. You take a sharp turn, duck behind a pile of discarded barrels, and hold your breath. You hear the guard lumber past. You wait, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Just when you think you're safe, you hear a voice behind you. Looking for someone? You turn around slowly. It's Thomas, your contact. He's holding a dagger. And he doesn't look very friendly. Surprise, surprise, you think to yourself. Is anyone who they appear to be? The Duke, the Queen, the tavern owners, the birds? I'm afraid, Thomas says, a chilling smile spreading across his face, your services are no longer required. This is far from ideal. You think back to the doves, falcons, badgers, foliage. What does it all mean? You wish you had paid more attention to the lute player. Maybe he was trying to warn you all along. The Game of Thrones, it turns out, isn't so fun from down here. Though the muddy ground does feel wonderfully cool. Alright, hey there, settle in, grab your metaphorical blankie, and let's just breathe together. We're gonna delve into a topic that's, shall we say, not exactly a laugh riot. Think of it as existential ASMR. The loneliness of the assassin. Yeah. Fun, right? You trudge through the pre-dawn mist, the chill seeping into your bones despite the layers you're wearing. You haven't felt genuine sunshine on your skin in, well, you've honestly lost track. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months, all marked by the same routine: preparation, execution, disappearance. Repeat ad nauseum. You're practically a one-person assembly line of calculated demise. And what's the perk of this gig? You get to enjoy all of this, alone. Think about it. You can't exactly bring a +1 to that rooftop stakeout. Oh, hey, Gertrude, meet Igor. He's gonna help me, observe the local wildlife. Yeah, that wouldn't go over well, would it? No casual Fridays for you, buddy. You're on call 24/7, ready to drop everything the moment a coded message hits your burner phone. And the dating scene? Forget about it. So, what do? I manage high-risk clientele. My service is guaranteed to put them 6 feet under. Red Flag City. The thing is, it's not just the practical isolation. It's the existential loneliness that really gnaws at you. You're constantly surrounded by people, yet completely detached. You see their lives, their families, their petty dramas unfolding, but you're just an observer, a ghost in the machine. You're a predator in the shadows, and so the concept of ever knowing or trusting people is laughable. Do you even remember what it feels like to laugh with someone without a hidden agenda? And it's not just about other people. It's about you. Can you even really trust yourself? After all, you are an instrument of death. It's a job that has, in a way, dehumanized you. Every assassination is a little chip off your soul, and the longer you're in this game, the fewer chips you have left to lose. You're living in a state of paranoia, knowing that any moment could be your last, any shadow could conceal your executioner. Of course, there have been assassins who sought companionship. Take, for example, Mata Hari. She had plenty of company, though the historical record remains fuzzy on exactly how much espionage she was really committing. Historians still argue whether she was a genuine spy or just a convenient scapegoat during World War I. Either way, she certainly seemed to embrace the social aspects of her profession, let's say. But let's be honest, most of us are not the femme fatale type. Here's a fun factoid for you. Back in the 16th century, there was a secret assassin school in Japan called the Bank Shinobiniden. While these ninjas certainly had their comrades, they were still bound by a strict code of silence and secrecy, even from each other. I guess some people would consider those to be friends, but I would argue that your teammates aren't really your friends. You know, the funny thing is that people think assassins must be cold-blooded psychopaths. But the truth is, the best assassins are the ones who feel things. You have to understand human motivations, empathize with your targets, at least on some level, and anticipate their actions. The feeling is often the part that hurts most of all. And that is where the loneliness stems from. You carry their story, their potential, and the grief of ending it all by yourself. You bear the weight of a life extinguished, and you can't share that burden with anyone. It's all on you. The silence becomes a constant companion. The only voice you ever hear is the one in your head, constantly replaying the past, calculating the future, and reminding you of everything you've lost. You might try filling the void with distractions, a fancy apartment, expensive gadgets, a fleeting encounter with someone who doesn't know the real you. But it's all just a temporary fix, a band-aid on a gaping wound. I can bet you're wondering if there is a fix. Can you truly escape this cycle of solitude? Can you ever find redemption, or are you doomed to wander the shadows forever? Those are the questions that keep you up at night. And the longer you stay in the game, the harder they become to answer. And let's not forget the constant fear of betrayal. You work for people who are, shall we say, not known for their unwavering loyalty. One wrong move, one slip-up, and you could easily become the target yourself. The assassination industry is highly competitive. And your employer might decide you're a liability, a loose end that needs to be snipped. So you're constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering who's watching you, who's planning your demise. Makes it hard to sleep at night, doesn't it? You might try to find solace in the idea that you're doing this for a greater good, that you're ridding the world of evil. But that's a slippery slope. Morality gets awfully blurry when you're the one pulling the trigger. And sooner or later, you start to wonder if you're really making a difference, or just perpetuating the cycle of violence. Do you know what the highest recorded bounty was for a historical assassination target? It's a fascinating story. According to some accounts, the bounty placed on the head of Pancho Villa reached a staggering $50,000, back when that kind of money could buy you a small town. Of course, Villa met his end, but it was in an ambush, not at the hands of a bounty hunter. Maybe they were all too scared. What do you think happens to assassins when they get old? Some probably get caught. Some probably go crazy. Some might just go home. Maybe they finally buy that little cottage by the sea they always dreamed of. But even then, the memories will haunt them. The faces of their victims, the weight of their actions, will always be there, lurking in the shadows of their minds. Ultimately, you're a prisoner of your own choices, your own skills. You're a master of deception, a shadow dancer, a whisper in the wind. But beneath the mask of the assassin lies a lonely, isolated soul, yearning for connection, for meaning, for something more. But is it possible? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel, or is it just the headlights of an oncoming truck? That, my friend, is the million-dollar question. What do you do when the life you live and the life you want are worlds apart? Are you truly ready to make a change? Or will you let the shadows consume you completely? And with that thought hanging in the air, let's just breathe again. You've earned it. And even if you are alone in your path, well, we are not alone. Now try to get some sleep, okay? You deserve it. Okay, settle in, friend. Let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw. We're going to talk about something universally human, the sheer, unadulterated panic of being found out. The exquisite agony of always looking over your shoulder. Imagine it, you're walking down a sun-drenched street. Birds are chirping, children are laughing, and a street vendor is selling, well, let's say they're selling suspiciously bright blue cotton candy. You take a bite. It tastes like regret and artificial blueberry. But underneath that, a creeping dread. A feeling that at any moment, the fabric of your perfectly constructed reality could unravel. Because deep down, you know you're hiding something. Maybe it's a terrible tax evasion scheme. Maybe you just accidentally wore mismatched socks today. The stakes, honestly, don't really matter. It's the feeling that counts. The icy finger tracing a line down your spine. The quickening pulse. The sudden, overwhelming urge to flee to a remote Tibetan monastery and become a yak herder. That's the fear of discovery in a nutshell. You know, they say that King Henry VIII, a man not exactly known for his gentle bedside manner, suffered from a lifelong fear of being poisoned. I mean, makes sense, right? A lot of powerful people throughout history have worried about poison. But Henry's anxiety was so intense that he reportedly employed multiple food tasters, and even then, he'd eye every dish with suspicion, like it was personally plotting his demise. The man had 6 wives, and that didn't make him paranoid? Historians still argue whether his fear was a symptom of genuine political threat or simply a manifestation of his own tyrannical tendencies. Either way, can you imagine the stress? Never truly enjoying a meal, always wondering if that roast swan is your last. It's enough to give you indigestion just thinking about it. Speaking of swans, did you know in medieval England swans were considered royal property, and killing one was punishable by severe fines? Guess Henry really liked swans. He probably slept with a swan-shaped pillow. You know, for comfort. But it's not just monarchs and historical figures. We all experience this fear to some extent. Think about those white lies you tell to avoid awkward social situations. Oh, I'd love to come to your Tupperware party, Brenda, but I have a pre-existing commitment to decluttering my sock drawer. It's a very intensive process. Then Brenda spots you at the movies, gleefully enjoying a giant bucket of popcorn. Boom. Exposure. The humiliation. The judgment. It's enough to make you question your entire existence. And your sock drawer. Maybe you should declutter it. The consequences of exposure, of course, vary depending on the secret. For some, it's a social faux pas. For others, it's professional ruin. And for a select few, it's imprisonment or even death. Consider the plight of spies. Imagine living a double life, constantly juggling identities, codes, and loyalties. Every interaction is a potential minefield. Every phone call, a risk. Every whispered conversation, a gamble. Think about those poor double agents during the Cold War. One wrong move, one slip of the tongue, and your cover is blown. You're not just out of a job, you're potentially facing a firing squad or a lengthy vacation at a Siberian gulag. Fun times. And it's not like that sort of thing only happens in movies, either. Back in 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed for conspiracy to commit espionage. They were accused of passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union. The case was highly controversial at the time, and even now, historians debate the extent of Ethel's involvement. Some believe she was a key player, while others argue she was simply a victim of circumstance, caught in the crossfire of Cold War paranoia. Regardless, the Rosenberg story serves as a chilling reminder of the very real stakes involved in keeping secrets. What a family drama. But you don't need to be an international spy to feel this kind of pressure. Think about the pressure of maintaining a certain image online. We all curate our social media profiles to present the best possible version of ourselves. Flawless skin, exotic vacations, witty banter. But what happens when that carefully constructed facade crumbles? When your true self, with all its imperfections and anxieties, peeks through? The horror. The shame. The desperate scramble to delete embarrassing photos and unfollow ex-boyfriends. Social media is a terrifying beast. I wonder what people did before social media to hide all their weird habits. Probably just yelled them into the abyss, who knows? Now, let's not forget the guilt factor. Sometimes, the fear of discovery stems not from the potential consequences, but from the moral implications of the secret itself. You've betrayed a trust, broken a promise, or done something you deeply regret. And the weight of that knowledge is crushing. It gnaws at you, keeping you awake at night, poisoning your relationships. You know the feeling. It's like having a tiny, perpetually whining gnome living in your brain, constantly reminding you of your transgressions. You cheated on that spelling test in 5th grade. You never returned Mrs. Henderson's Tupperware. You told your dog he wasn't a good boy that one time. The gnome is relentless. That kind of guilt can be debilitating. Speaking of debilitating, ever heard of Stockholm Syndrome? It's a psychological response where hostages develop positive feelings towards their captors. It was named after a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, where the hostages became emotionally attached to the criminals holding them captive. I guess having a gun pointed at you can create some very strange bonds. Anyway, the point is, even in the face of extreme adversity, the human mind is capable of incredible feats of adaptation and even, dare I say, Stockholm Syndrome-esque rationalization. Like, well, at least they're giving me snacks while they threaten me. So, what's the solution? How do we escape this constant fear of discovery? Well, there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. Some people choose to confess their secrets, seeking absolution and redemption. Others bury them deep, hoping they'll never resurface. And some, well, some become masters of deception, weaving intricate webs of lies to protect themselves. Me? I try to stay out of trouble. That's usually my go-to. I mean, it doesn't always work, but at least I try, right? Ultimately, the fear of discovery is a fundamental part of the human experience. It's a reminder of our vulnerability, our imperfections, and our capacity for both good and evil. But it's also a catalyst for growth, forcing us to confront our mistakes, learn from our experiences, and strive to become better versions of ourselves. Or, just become a yak herder. That sounds pretty appealing right about now. But before you run off to the Himalayas, take a deep breath. Relax those shoulders. And remember, everyone has secrets. Everyone makes mistakes. And everyone, at some point, feels the icy grip of the fear of discovery. You're not alone. Now, go forth and face the world, my friend. Just try not to wear mismatched socks. Brenda might be watching. You trudge along the muddy track, the wind biting at your exposed cheeks. Ah, the medieval world. Charming, isn't it? Like a rustic, open-air museum, where everything smells vaguely of manure and impending doom. You adjust the rough-spun wool of your tunic, which is doing precisely zero to keep you warm. Comfort was not exactly a priority back then, survival was more the goal. Each day was a game of roulette, except instead of money, you were betting your health, your happiness, and occasionally, your life. Look around. See that village nestled in the valley? Peaceful, right? Maybe. But scratch the surface, and you'll find a world where death is less of an if, and more of a when, and how spectacularly. You pass a woman carrying a pail of water. She smiles, a flash of missing teeth. Hygiene wasn't exactly their strong suit. Did you know that bathing was considered dangerous by some medieval physicians? They believed it opened your pores to evil humors. Personally, I think smelling like a badger is far more dangerous to one's social life, but what do I know? Historians still argue whether these doctors actually thought this, or if they were simply lazy. You step over a puddle, trying not to splash your boots. Leather boots. Fancy. Most folks would be wearing wooden clogs or going barefoot. Suddenly, a cart rattles past, carrying a shrouded body. Plague cart. Lovely. The Black Death, of course, wasn't the only killer around. Dysentery, famine, war, accidents, death was a constant companion. You see a group of children playing near the village square. What games do they play? Probably something morbid. A reenactment of a recent hanging? Guessing which neighbor will be next to succumb to the fever? You shudder slightly. The innocence of youth, brutally compromised. Now, you enter the village. The smell of wood smoke and stale ale hangs in the air. A blacksmith hammers away at his forge, sparks flying. Impressive, until you consider the odds of him accidentally hammering his thumb. Or getting a piece of hot metal in his eye. Or contracting tetanus from a rusty nail. It was a risky profession, blacksmithing. But everything was risky. Heck, even getting a haircut could be a gamble back then. The village church stands prominently at the center of town. Religion was a cornerstone of medieval life, offering solace in the face of all that, well, death. People genuinely believed in heaven and hell, and this belief gave them a framework for understanding the world, and facing the fear of the great unknown. You notice a small cemetery beside the church. Even in death, space was limited. Bodies were often buried in layers, one on top of the other. You might be walking on someone's great-great-grandparent right now. Don't worry, they probably wouldn't mind. A group of men are arguing loudly in front of the tavern. A dispute over land, most likely, or a debt unpaid. Violence was commonplace. The concept of turning the other cheek wasn't exactly trending. A fight could erupt over the smallest slight, and often did. You notice one of the men is carrying a rather impressive-looking dagger. Very practical, but I can't help but think about all the times he is poking himself by accident. A merchant approaches you, trying to sell you some herbs. Good for what ails ya? He cries with a wink. Ah, medicine. A fascinating blend of superstition, folklore, and occasional, accidental effectiveness. Did you know that bleeding was a common cure-all? For everything from a headache to a broken leg. You might feel a little better afterward just because you are relieved that they stopped. Historians still argue whether some of these remedies actually contained ingredients with medicinal properties, or if they were purely placebo. You politely decline the merchant's offer, thinking you might stick with modern medicine for the time being. It's hard to believe that people thought leeches were the answer to everything. You pass a group of women gathered around a well, gossiping. They eye you with curiosity. News traveled slowly in the medieval world. A stranger was always an event. You overhear them discussing a recent outbreak of the sweating sickness. Sounds unpleasant. Imagine being so sick you just sweat uncontrollably, and then die. Charming. Though its exact nature remains a mystery, it was a terrifying illness that swept through Europe several times, causing widespread panic. As you continue your walk, you notice a scarecrow standing in a field. A rather pathetic-looking scarecrow, actually. Its tattered clothes barely clinging to its frame. It's supposed to scare away birds, but it looks more likely to scare away, well, nothing, really. This makes me think of the medieval concept of the danse macabre, or the dance of death, where death leads people of all walks of life to the grave. Even the rich and powerful were ultimately powerless against death. Except, possibly, for those who had relics of the saints. The bones of these holy figures were believed to have miraculous healing powers. Historians still argue whether these relics were genuine or simply clever forgeries. You feel a sudden chill. The sun is beginning to set, and the shadows are growing longer. It's time to find shelter. The medieval world was not a place to be caught out alone after dark. Not only were there bandits and wild animals to worry about, but also, well, let's just say that people believed in some pretty scary things that went bump in the night. Things that preferred the dark. As the day is wrapping up, I just wanted to remind you that the mortality rate for children was a high percentage. It seems obvious, but I think we often forget just how lucky we are now, comparatively. You can go to sleep without feeling like a death sentence. Alright, settle in now. Let the day drift away like a fallen leaf on a gentle stream. Picture yourself nestled in a warm, soft bed, the worries of the medieval world fading into the distance. Imagine the rhythmic sound of a crackling fire, the comforting weight of a thick blanket. The air is still and quiet, filled with the promise of restful slumber. Let your muscles relax, one by one. Feel the tension melt away from your shoulders, your neck, your jaw. Breathe deeply, in and out, slowly and evenly. Think of a peaceful meadow bathed in moonlight, a place of calm and tranquility. The world outside is hushed, and you are safe and secure. Let your thoughts slow, like a gentle river winding its way to the sea. There is nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. You are surrounded by peace and serenity. Allow yourself to drift, to float, to surrender to the embrace of sleep. The night is yours, a time for rest and rejuvenation. Let go of the day, and welcome the sweet oblivion of dreams. Everything is alright, everything is peaceful, everything is calm. Sleep now. Sweet dreams.